And in our Spotlight investigation tonight, Crack Inc., the big business and big money of the most potent form of cocaine, crack. Crack is a plague of the inner city. Tonight, NBC's Jim Cummins on how one gang adopted corporate methods to run the Detroit crack operation.
Among the most remarkable examples is the notorious Chambers Brothers gang of Detroit. Billy Joe, 26, Otis, 20, Willie, 34, and the ringleader, Larry, 38.
A lot of people reference me as the guy that inspired the movie New Jack City. And you know, a lot of people's jokingly call me Nino Brown. I did serve 27 years. Well, I didn't actually serve 27. I served 23 years on a 27-year sentence.
Have you ever watched a movie and wondered if the characters were based on real people? Well, it happens sometimes. Remember Nino Brown, the ruthless gangster from the 1991 film New Jack City? Did you know that his character was inspired by a real-life figure, one of Detroit's most notorious criminals?
A lot of people reference me as the guy that inspired the movie New Jack City. And you know, a lot of people's jokingly call me Nino Brown.
Meet the Chambers Brothers, the men behind the scenes, who made Nino Brown look like a choir boy. Seeing this guy now, you'd think he can't even hurt a fly, not to talk about running a drug empire. But wait until you hear more.
The gang has dominated the drug racket here since 1983, when it replaced another gang which had been shut down by the police. Violence was also part of the Chambers Brothers' action, such a big part that prosecutors say today's crack gangs are far more dangerous than the crime syndicate.
Definitely, those were not guys you'd have wanted to tangle with. That amount of firepower in the 80s is definitely crazy. In the movie, Nino and his crew take over an apartment complex called the Carter to run their drug empire. But what they didn't tell you is that this story wasn't just fiction. It was based on real events that unfolded on the streets of Detroit. Imagine a place where fear ruled every corner, where the law dared not tread, and where the Chambers Brothers held sway. The Broadmoor apartment complex was that place. Situated on E. Grand Blaved and Ferry Saint, this complex became their fortress, a hub for their drug-dealing operations. This was their kingdom, and they ruled it with an iron fist. But who were the Chambers Brothers, and why did they strike terror into the hearts of Detroiters? They weren't your typical gangsters. They were something far more sinister. With their cunning tactics and merciless ways, they climbed to the top of Detroit's underworld, leaving a trail of devastation in their wake.
Members of traditional organized crime families have stayed away from crack cocaine so far. U.S. Attorney Hayes believes that the people who now control the crack business are so unpredictably violent, they even scare the old-time gangsters.
You've probably heard of rags to riches stories, but none quite like the Chambers Brothers. These guys weren't just hustlers, they were the kings of the game, pulling in more cash than any legit business in Detroit during their peak. Imagine making $150 million a year. That's the kind of dough they were rolling in. But before they were living large, they came from the dirt-poor backwoods of Arkansas.
They were recruiting gang members in their hometown, Marianna, Arkansas, luring unemployed teenagers with visions of luxury cars, furs, golden cash. About 150 teenagers left Arkansas to work in the gang's crack houses.
Born into a family scraping by as sharecroppers in Marianna, Arkansas, the Chambers Brothers knew hard work from an early age. With a family of 16 crammed into a tiny cabin, they had to fight for every scrap. Poverty wasn't just a hardship, it was a way of life. But it wasn't just poverty they faced. Racism was as common as the dirt they worked. In a town frozen in time where Confederate ghosts still lingered, being black meant being second class. They faced violence and discrimination daily, with no one to turn to for justice. But despite the odds stacked against them, the Chambers Brothers refused to be victims. They hustled, finding ways to survive when the world seemed determined to crush them. From picking pockets at their family's juke joint to playing pool against grown men on crates. They learned early on that breaking the rules could get you ahead. Their parents, Curtis and Hazel, showed them the way, running that juke joint with a mix of grit and guile. It was there that the brothers learned the art of the hustle, seeing firsthand that if you wanted something, you had to go out and take it. But even hustlers have their limits. When their parents split and the juke joint closed, it could have been the end of the road. Instead, it was just the beginning. Larry, Wiley Lee, BJ, and Otis, the four brothers everyone remembers, rose from the ashes of their family's failed business to become criminal legends in their own right. Larry, the oldest and fiercest of the bunch, led the charge, fearless in the face of danger. Wiley Lee, BJ, and Otis had his back, each bringing their own brand of hustle to the table. Together, they were unstoppable.
Among the most remarkable examples is the notorious Chambers Brothers gang of Detroit. Billy Joe, 26, Otis, 20, Willie, 34, and the ringleader, Larry, 38.
Living in the neighborhood, they were like shadows, feared by many. Larry, the eldest, cast a long, dark shadow, making others scatter in fear. Willie, once an army man turned postal worker, fell into a life of crime. BJ, the smooth talker, hustled his way into people's hearts. Otis, the youngest, was impulsive but fierce. Despite their small stature, these brothers were giants in the streets, commanding respect and fear. Of all the Chambers brothers, the only one with a significant criminal record prior to the family's entrance into the drug trade was Larry, the third eldest sibling. Marlowe, as he was sometimes called, was highly intelligent. A prison psychiatrist once tested his IQ at well over 140, yet he didn't want a regular 9-to-5 job as a young adult. Instead, finding himself drawn to the jolt he got from living a life on the wrong side of the law. While the rest of his brothers all dabbled in some form of legitimate employment before turning to narcotics to make their living. From an early age, Larry knew being a crook was the only existence he ever wanted. One Christmas Eve, Larry found himself behind bars after a botched theft. Undeterred, he staged a daring escape on New Year's Eve, only to be caught again after a string of armed robberies. His antics earned him a 40-year prison sentence, but Larry wasn't one to stay locked up for long. He managed to escape multiple times, evading capture until his luck finally ran out. Despite facing hefty sentences, Larry's resilience never waned. After each stint behind bars, he returned to his old ways, carrying out more robberies and run-ins with the law. But it wasn't until his conviction was overturned by the state Supreme Court that Larry glimpsed a chance at redemption. Returning to his hometown, Larry tried to turn his life around, but old habits die hard. Before long, he was back to his old ways, robbing jewelry stores across the state. His spree came to an end when he was apprehended in Detroit, betrayed by a former accomplice. Locked up once again, Larry underwent a transformation behind bars. He traded in his vices for a newfound devotion to health and spirituality. Embracing yoga and meditation, he became a beacon of discipline for his fellow inmates. Gone was the unpredictable wild card. In his place stood a man with a plan. Life was tough for Billy Joe Chambers and his brothers. Seeking greener pastures, Billy Joe ventured up the Delta to Detroit, hoping for a brighter future away from the toil of farm life. Little did he know, his journey would lead him down a path fraught with danger and destruction. I don't believe that family, the Chambers, came up north to become criminals, but that's what they became, said Dr. Carl Taylor. They came to Detroit to better themselves, get jobs in the plants, find a better life. When they realized that they couldn't sustain that dream or that certain variables prevented them from attaining it, things got twisted real fast and they turned to making a living on the street. Obviously, they were pretty good at it. Detroit welcomed Billy Joe with open arms, but it wasn't long before he found himself entangled in the lucrative marijuana trade. Success came knocking, but it wasn't enough. Tempted by the promise of even greater profits, Billy Joe reluctantly delved into the crack coke market, lured by its addictive grip on users and the promise of exponential returns. What they did was a rare in the sense that these young men were outsiders, and they were able to come in without any real help from the Detroit homeboys and basically take over a huge part of the city just for themselves, one insider said. These were country boys, and guys around here kind of dismissed them as hayseeds and didn't really give them the time of day at first, but it wasn't long before that all changed, and the locals were forced to give them their respect because they, the Chambers, were a force of nature in that once they got going, their operation was rolling and constantly growing. With the help of a family friend, Billy Joe and his brothers soon established themselves as major players in the crack trade. Their network spread like wildfire, fueled by violence and ruthlessness. Displaying his well-honed business sense, BJ used 2 of his properties, a car wash and a store, to launch his own burgeoning drug empire, pushing marijuana and H substance out of both places. With a steady supply line of drugs coming from Big Terry Colbert and surrounded by a close-knit crew of lieutenants made up of family members and trusted associates, the soon-to-be kingpin was off and running. Then there was his ever-growing workforce, an ever-expanding group of teenagers and young adults that, as soon as the Chambers organization was up and operating at full capacity, started relocating en masse from Arkansas, looking to attain wealth in the Detroit drug game. DEA documents from the era estimate over 300 young men and women from Marina and the surrounding areas of the Delta region migrated to the Motor City and went to work for the Chambers gang selling drugs.
They were recruiting gang members in their hometown, Marianna, Arkansas, luring unemployed teenagers with visions of luxury cars, furs, gold, and cash. About 150 teenagers left Arkansas to work in the gang's crack houses.
The seeds of success had been planted. They would soon blossom into a garden of riches, the likes of which were well beyond any of the brothers' wildest dreams. Diminutive in size, barely 5'5" in height, BJ made up for his lack of physical stature with an ironclad will, natural business sense, and a gigantic-sized ambition. Once he got started in business for himself, he wasted little time imposing all 3 on the city he called his adopted hometown. The Chambers brothers case became the biggest coke distribution case in the history of the United States based on the sheer scale of their operation. The government alleged that the Chambers brothers operated 300 crack houses between 1983 and 1988, which made $1 to $3 million per day. The Chambers brothers operated like a well-oiled corporate machine, with strict regulations for their runners and consumer-friendly initiatives like discount coupons and 2-for-1 deals on crack rocks. They quickly rose to prominence, dominating the crack trade in low-income neighborhoods across Detroit. Their success was built on the backs of young, primarily black youth, who were lured into the drug trade by the promise of easy money. The Chambers brothers exploited this vulnerability, exposing a generation to the horrors of addiction and violence. In the spring of 1986, the Chambers brothers, led by BJ and Larry, mourned the loss of their brother, Little Joe, in a lavish funeral in Arkansas. Fueled by grief and a desire to honor Little Joe's memory, they returned to Detroit with new recruits and plans for expanding their narcotics empire. Their extravagant lifestyle, fueled by drug money, caught the attention of law enforcement. Patricia Middleton, Larry's den mother, began providing insider information to authorities, leading to raids and the uncovering of damning evidence against the Chambers brothers. An important moment came when Larry and his lieutenant, Jack Frost Jackson, filmed themselves flaunting their wealth, unknowingly providing crucial evidence of their crimes. This, coupled with raids on their drug houses, dealt a significant blow to their operation. The final nail in the coffin was the discovery of incriminating home videos showcasing the Chambers brothers' extravagant lifestyle and criminal activities. Despite BJ's minimal involvement, guilt by association sealed their fate. In 1992, police would arrest BJ and notice to get they would get Willie while he was at work and still wearing his post office uniform. Larry, who was named as the primary defendant in the indictment, had already been in custody at the time. During the arrests, police would also seize $1 million in cash and jewelry, 68 vehicles, and 250 weapons in their home videos. The Chambers loved to show off their vehicles. All 41 of them were confiscated, along with $500,000 in cash and $500,000 in jewelry. Then Detroit Police Chief William Hart also claimed it was a major victory for stopping the flow of drugs to the city. However, Hart would himself later be convicted of embezzling $2 million from police funds and sentenced to 10 years in prison. The Chambers brothers' trial would be held later that year in October 1988. The Chambers brothers and 10 associates are now on trial in the U.S. District Court in Detroit. They are charged with coke conspiracy and tax evasion in court. Witnesses accused the Chambers of keeping members in line with such tactics as pushing them out windows and mangling their fingers for sampling Coke 1. Informants were silenced, but the Chambers brothers' downfall continued with the death of their older brother, David, from AIDS complications in September 1987. By December, federal indictments were unsealed, leading to Larry's arrest and the dismantling of their criminal enterprise. Despite a flashy lifestyle, all four brothers would be found guilty on various charges. Larry and BJ would be the only of the brothers convicted on the most serious charge, the kingpin charge for operating a continuing criminal enterprise. In the end, Larry would be sentenced to life in prison, BJ would get 50 years while Willie would get 21 years and Otis 27 years. Willie would be released in 2007 after serving approximately 19 years in prison. BJ would also manage to get his sentence reduced to 27 years after a successful appeal in 1991 resulted in a vacating of his conviction on the kingpin charge. BJ was then released in July 2010, age 48 years old and having served 23 years in prison. Their once thriving business, symbolized by the boulevard, lay vacant and decaying, a relic of their rise and fall. Years later, Willie, BJ, and Otis regained their freedom, each bearing the weight of their past. Larry, now in his 60s, remains imprisoned, immortalized in the annals of crime history. Their story, chronicled in an episode of American Gangster, serves as a cautionary tale of ambition, excess, and the consequences of a life of crime. The Chambers brothers' legacy is one of rise and fall, a reminder that no empire built on illegal deeds can withstand the relentless pursuit of justice.